Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today we have a Mosin Nagant magazine to look at, and this one's pretty interesting because in fact it's actually not a Mosin Nagant magazine. Rather instead what this is specifically is a Häiriö vapaa suot tokotelo, which is a Finnish anti-jam Mosin Nagant magazine. Now this guy's pretty interesting. First of all, where did this guy come from? Well, this is a pretty strange story. Now, some of y'all know I got a friend down in Texas by the name of Big Con, who's into all sorts of weird gun stuff. Now, I keep on urging Big Con to make a YouTube channel, and I know one of these days he will, and it'll be pretty amazing. But Big Con had a birthday a while back, or was it Christmas? Maybe it was Christmas, but I decided to get him a 60-pound bucket of random gun parts, all right? And mostly it seemed like there was just odds and ends of random things and a lot of black powder parts in there. But little did I know that at the bottom of this toxic bucket of horrors lied a Mosin magazine. But not just any Mosin magazine, a special Mosin magazine from Finland. So he found this and he said, hey, here's a Mosin magazine, and he showed it to me and I was like, you know what, this one's kind of interesting. So I wanted to make a video where we can go through it together and we can look at some of the reasons why this one's interesting. Now on the surface it looks pretty horrible. This I think is anthrax, and then on this side we've got some, I'm not sure if that's rust or leprosy. A little bit of leprosy and a little bit of anthrax, but probably not enough to hurt anything. Now, why is this one a special Finnish magazine? Well, it's really easy to tell. You see this guy right here? There's this little crimp mark right here, and you don't see this indentation on normal Mosin magazines. You don't generally see this. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the purpose of this is supposed to be a Finnish anti-jam magazine. So Mosins have a rimmed cartridge, right? And maybe you've seen our episode on rim lock, okay? Where you could have a potential where you're trying to load cartridges and you're trying to go to load the one at the top here, but it gets caught behind the rim of the cartridge lower than it, and then you can't load this guy into the chamber because it gets stuck right there. So Mosins have what's called an interrupter, and the interrupter sits actually right here in the magazine. There's this little cutout here for the interrupter to protrude through. The interrupter is going to poke through here and hold this cartridge down far enough to where when you try to load this one, the rim isn't actually going to hit it. But apparently Finland didn't think that was totally sufficient. So what they came up with was an interesting system where they just make this little indentation in the magazine, right? There's no new parts here. You don't have to make a new magazine. But the idea is that this is supposed to, it essentially pushes in here and it makes it such that you definitely won't have any sort of rim lock, and it really makes sure that the cartridge, as you can see here, it actually hits it, so you can feel it sit here. It gives it more resistance, so it kind of gives you a little bit extra resistance to make sure that the interrupter is going to do its job, even though the interrupter may not always do its job, because sometimes the interrupters can be a little off of the geometry of the particular gun you're on or what have you. So they decided that this was a pretty good approach to use. And you'll notice here that it's right up here at the top, and that's just again because when we're talking about rim lock, the only thing we care about is the penultimate cartridge. It's the cartridge just below the one you're trying to feed, which is why they made this modification right here. Because the one you're trying to feed is right up here, so the one you want to make sure it's below that is going to be right there. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now this came about, they had a drawing submitted around, I think it was March 16th of 1934, and exactly 1 week later, that drawing was formally adopted, and the Sacco factory started implementing this new magazine process, which is pretty interesting. Now, I don't know all the details of if they started taking old magazines from guns and just sending them to the Sacco factory. I would imagine that would have overwhelmed them very quickly. I would imagine this was more of a as-needed process. Let's say a gun comes in for repair, or a gun comes in to be upgraded to a higher spec rifle. Maybe it was like an M91 getting converted to a different Finnish variant. Maybe it was getting a new barrel. Maybe while it was there, it would have had this done to it. So you don't always see this on Finnish Mosins, but when you do, it's pretty cool. Now, this magazine isn't exactly what I would call rare. It's not common, and generally when you see a magazine by itself, it's probably going to be from a refurbished 9130 magazine. So anytime you see this, it's just interesting to point it out to help people understand why it's here. Now, generally, you're supposed to see a little marking on these, and it'll say two letters, HV. And that HV stands for that anti-jam in Finnish, which we said earlier. But I don't see that on this one. Now, it can vary, and you don't always see it. But it is something to look for, because you can see here the stock line is right here. So above this line, all this metal is going to be behind the stock. So if you don't have that little HV marking, it can actually be pretty hard to tell if the magazine in the rifle you're looking at has this particular anti-jam modification or not. So the next time you have your Finnish Mosin apart, you should definitely just check to see if it has this or not. Because again, a lot of them don't have this, but some of them do, so that's pretty cool. But that's not the only thing that's novel about this one. Now, I've got a lot of spare magazines sitting around, and we haven't had one of these to look at yet, so I'm thankful that Big Con has donated this one here to the channel so we can take a look at it. But we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the markings on this one, because we always like doing that. And this one has got some pretty interesting character to it. I can zoom in a little bit. Now, the first marking we always like to look at on these guys is going to be the bottom one down here, because that's going to tell us who made this whole body. But before we do that, right, we always like to see if this is a Type 1 or a Type 2 magazine. And for those of y'all who haven't seen the video or you forgot what that is, a Type 1 magazine is going to be riveted together, and a Type 2 magazine is actually going to be spot welded together. So what you want to do is sort of look here, and you'll typically see some riveting marks. And in fact, there's one right here. See if I can zoom in on that. It's a little hard to see, but sometimes they're really hard to see. But right here, see there's this little circle? That is a rivet mark. So we know this is a Type 1 magazine, and it was probably produced before 1935. All right, and again, when the Finns made these, Finland didn't really, that we know of, produce any magazine bodies, okay? They had enough spare parts lying around that they bought off of other foreign countries after World War I that they never really needed to. Between that and all of the parts and guns that turned into parts that they captured during the Winter and Continuation Wars, these were just old magazines that were retrofitted. So we know that this one's before 1935, and I suspect that before we look at the marking, this one may have originally had a sling swivel here. Okay, now let's look on the other side again. Now remember, the sling swivel used to go on these guys. And one of the reasons I think that is because you can kind of feel, yeah, I can feel it with my finger right here. You'll feel this little wear mark, and that's where the sling swivel was here, and it used to wear up against the magazine body. So you can usually feel if this had a sling swivel here. Now, in Finland, pretty much all of them were removed. And not even just Finland, basically everywhere after 1910-ish, we'll talk about that in a future video, they removed those in favor of just these normal rivets here. But again, that was only done on M91 rifles. The different variants pre-1910, none of them actually had the swivel. It was only the M91 variant. So it appears this was a Type 1 that was on an M91. And another reason I think that's because you see this this rivet looks really horrible. See how it looks all like crushed? This doesn't look like it was done at a weapons factory. This doesn't look original. This looks like it was a replacement that someone did out of necessity. So sometimes you'll see that on Finnish magazines as well. So from everything we have here, I can tell you it looks like we probably have a World War I M91 Mosin magazine. Let's take a look at the bottom marking here. All right, and we can confirm that because right here we have a Sistrayetsk arrow. So that indicates that this magazine was made during or before 1918. So this is a very old magazine, and this is a less common manufacturer, so that's really cool to see. And this confirms all of our theories thus far about what this magazine is, because Sistrayetsk only ever made M91 rifles. Okay, so this is a Sistrayetsk, and we said it was made during or before 1918, but we know it was made during or before around 1910 because it originally had that sling swivel. So let's say pre-1910. Okay, now the floor plate's where things get really strange. Now normally on Finnish Mosins, you'll see a number here, or actually, it's actually very common to see no number here. A lot of times Finland just ground off the number, or it just wore off over the years. But like a lot of Finnish Mosins, there's no particular numbering right here, but this is weird because there is a numbering back here. Now this is a very, very strange numbering, both in font and placement. Now I've looked at a lot of Mosins, but I've never seen numbering on a magazine body right here. No matter the country, no matter the time era, if there is a Mosin magazine that has a serial number on the bottom of the floor plate here, it's always going horizontally across this way. It's never going the opposite direction down here, right? So I guess this is kind of horizontal and this would be vertical. It's always going vertical down, never horizontal across like this. This, folks, is a big mystery of who did this. So our serial number here is 80,491. So here's the question. Did Finland do this? Well, probably not, okay? It's possible that they did this, but I've never seen another one like this. Now, generally, Finnish Mosins, Finland, let's say on their M91 rifles or M27 rifles or M28 rifles, they didn't generally go out of their way to number the floor plates. They didn't really care. You don't really ever see those floor plates renumbered by Finland. Now, the Finns did renumber the bolts, but that's not what we're talking about here, the magazines. In fact, the only Finnish Mosins I usually see that have Finland force-matched magazine serial numbers to the rifle are M39s. But again, that's coming down here, vertical. Never seen this before. So it's possible that Finland did this, but I would personally say it's unlikely. But this begs the question, though, who made this floor plate? It doesn't have checkering on the sides, so it's not like one of the very first ones ever made. So this is post probably 1893. But let's take a look at who made this magazine floor plate, because remember, the floor plate is a separate piece than the magazine, and just because it's attached to this magazine body doesn't mean that the Sistrayetsk factory made this floor plate. So let's check it. To remove it, we're going to just pull this tab here, open it up like that. Okay, pull it down, and it's going to hit a stop there. And then I just squeeze the floor plate like that and pull it out. That simple. Okay, now generally the manufacturer marking will be here on the back. So let's take a look at this. Okay. So it looks like we have here there we go. Get my focus in a little bit better. A Tula Hammer. So this floor plate was not made by the Sistrayetsk factory, but rather the Tula factory during or before 1928. It doesn't really tell us a lot because these are pretty common among Finnish Mosins. Tula is going to be the most common manufacturer that you'll see of like spare parts and such. So that doesn't really give us a lot to go off of who did this. See if we can find any other markings here. This spring is going to be a different piece, and I don't see any markings here that would really tell me enough to determine who made that. There's a 3. Looks like this could be a Tula Hammer here. So this is probably, it's hard to say, but this could be original to the floor plate as well, because right, the top piece here is pinned in place. There's this pin holding it in. Okay, so only pre-1928 Tula markings. And oh look, if we look on the underside of this guy, there's our marking again, right there. See? Pre-28 Tula Hammer. Well, that's pretty cool. And it just goes to show, man, you could spend hours looking at all these markings and trying to track all these rascals down. So you have a Tula marking there, Tula marking there, Tula marking there. We have a Tula floor plate, folks. So that's really cool, but that doesn't necessarily tell us enough to determine, right, who did this. So we're going to continue doing research on this, but again, this is one thing I wanted to point out. Now, if you've seen something like this or have a picture of something like this, please send it to me, because I've been unable to find anything like this before or since seeing this. But I'll keep looking. And who knows, it could be that Finland just did this and then decided, you know what, this is pretty dumb, we're not even going to bother doing that. And I can understand that. And that happens a lot of times with things where, like, remember I said earlier, they didn't typically mark the floor plate. Well, it could be that they started to do that for like a few months and then realized this is kind of a waste of time, because like a bolt's good to number because the headspace can differ, but a floor plate, they're a lot more interchangeable. Now, bolts can be fairly interchangeable with Mosins, but these guys, even more so, are going to be way more interchangeable. So it's possible they decided to number them down here for a very short period of time and then said, that's a waste of time, we're not going to do it anymore. But again, I just don't know, because I've never seen anything like that before. So pretty interesting. We'll put this guy back in here. All right. We'll close them up. That simple. Now, the magazine bodies are pretty interchangeable. Really, the only thing you have to worry about is the stock. Sometimes they can be too wide for a stock, but generally speaking, that's not an issue. So I hope you all enjoyed taking a look at this cool anthrax and leprosy infested Finnish anti-jam Mosin Nagant magazine. I always like looking at weird Mosin stuff, and let's face it, something is always new and weird here on the channel. So if you like stuff like this, please consider subscribing and hit the bell so you don't miss another video like this and you don't miss one of our future giveaways. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know if y'all got any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.